I don't think that anybody knew in the year 2024 that the number of infertile women would have gone from 1 in 8 to 1 in 6 in just 3 years, like, which is a very alarming statistic. Or that, there are some terrifying projections about male sperm counts and motility over the next 10 years. And we're seeing those very issues in our clinic on a day-to-day basis.
Hi everyone, Saya here. I am talking to Traci Keen today. She is the CEO of Mate Fertility. And before we get started and introduce you to this pretty awesome company, I do want to disclose that I am an investor in the company because I believe in what they're doing. And hopefully you will agree after watching this. Hi Traci, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me, Saya.
So tell me just a little bit about yourself. How did you find yourself involved in Mate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually started my career in Boston back in middle office operations for mutual funds, fixed income. I was an SEC accountant, and then trade operations, brought a lot of stuff having to do with middle office, technical. And then I moved over to a boutique investment firm that was relatively small in the way of investment firms at the time. And I did analytics controller work for them. And they had about 6.7 billion under management. I was the 17th employee, and they grew in 3 years to over 100 employees, 27 billion under management. And so that really became an operational challenge where they were perpetually outgrowing their systems. And that kind of lit a bug in me about operational improvements and efficiency and scalability. And that was all in Boston. I moved out to LA in 2011 and started a consulting business. And I would do operational assessments and then help them find the right tools to improve their bottom lines, number one, but also manage their businesses better. And I got really burnt out consulting during COVID. It was years of clients and helping with hundreds of PPP loans. And I thought to myself, I have this Swiss Army set of skills, Swiss Army knife set of skills, and I should really be putting it towards something that I feel passionate about, that I think is ripe for change, and help to utilize that in a more meaningful way. And I came across Mate. I joined them in 2021. They had just opened their flagship facility. And ever since then, it's been really about getting the right players, the right tools, the right partnerships in place to really start to expand on the mission to increase availability of fertility care in the U.S. And it's pretty awesome. It's a fun, challenging job.
Yeah, so when I first heard about Mate, and just to give everyone who's watching some background, and Traci, please correct me for anything that I say that's not right, but Mate, what basically made me want to invest in Mate, because I am someone who, I froze my eggs after I got divorced in my 30s. I did end up using those eggs years later. I also went through some early fertility treatments in my mid to late 30s to have my children, and I just remember calling some of the biggest institutions around me. And the minimum wait time just to get in for the initial appointment was 6 weeks to 2 months. And for someone who literally the clock is ticking when you're in your mid 30s or late 30s, I remember I used to cry actually when I'd be like, is there any way you could get me in sooner? I was like, my eggs are gonna be older. I'm not gonna be able to like have a child. And I just remember how stressful that was. And for anyone watching, what Mate does, and please correct me if I'm wrong, they take a lot of what is considered basic fertility care, so not extremely complicated cases, and are able to have up-trained OBGYNs who are specifically trained to handle basic fertility care for a wide population of people. So for me specifically, I needed an HSG, which is a fairly basic procedure that was done, but it did need to be ordered by somebody. And it was ordered by my fertility specialist, but it could have been ordered by my OBGYN. And after my HSG, which is a procedure that it's supposed to be a diagnostic procedure, but many people do report that if you have sex after having an HSG, many people do tend to conceive naturally. And that's actually what happened to me for my first two kids. And so it's really interesting that I had to wait so long to just have an order for that procedure, because the procedure wasn't even actually done by a physician. And so I was really moved when I thought, wow, they're really making this more accessible to a lot of people. And so tell me if I'm right about the training, and can you talk a little bit more about the training
Yeah.
that Nate does?
Yeah, I think you were spot on directionally. And I think the diaspora of this industry is super interesting. I went to college with Elizabeth Carr. She was the first IVF baby ever born in the United States. So the industry's not that old. And I always like to give a lot of grace when I'm talking about the industry. I think it's amazing. It's new, it's emerging. It was, built not that long ago. But it wasn't necessarily built in a way that is standardized or scalable. And as you alluded to, it's really tricky. It's really challenging. There's not a lot of availability, particularly geographically. That's one of our primary goals, is to really focus on those secondary, tertiary city access points. Because 99% of the time when I mention I work in fertility, the first thing that comes out of anybody's mouth is it's so expensive, and that's absolutely true. Like, we are, less expensive than most out there, but that doesn't mean it's affordable. But what I always like to remind people is that geographically, it's, we can overcome price, and we will continue to get more efficient and try to chip away at bringing down prices. And I think we'll see shifts in the marketplace. Happy to get into that later in the combo. Um, but we're never going to be able to solve for geography. And so the supply side of this industry is really constrained. There are only about 1,100 practicing REIs throughout the country, predominantly in coastal cities, high net worth areas. And, back to that grace, I don't think that anybody knew in the year 2024 that the number of infertile women would have gone from 1 in 8 to 1 in 6 in just 3 years, which is a very alarming statistic. Or that there are some terrifying projections about male sperm counts and motility over the next 10 years, and we're seeing those very issues in our clinic on a day-to-day basis. So our primary ethos is to expand the availability of this treatment, utilize doctors at the top of their license, and standardize the way that those doctors are practicing medicine. Mate fertility is a model. We don't, mate fertility itself isn't practicing medicine. We're providing tools that enable doctors to have best outcomes for low complexity cases. We like to refer to them as vanilla cases, and get a lower price point, get more geographic access, and continue to expand and improve upon that as we grow.
Yeah, so I think for someone watching, the concept is the REI specialist is still very relevant. And of course, for anyone who's having trouble conceiving, they probably do at some point need to see an REI specialist. But if you fall into a category that I fell into, where I just needed a tiny bit of help, I probably could have gotten that a little bit sooner than I ended up getting.
Yep.
And I'm also lucky that I live in Washington, D.C. If I had lived in somewhere other than Washington, D.C., or other than a major city, I think it would have been even more challenging for me to even just get that basic level of care. Can you tell me a little bit about the training process of, you
Yeah.
had mentioned that you're having doctors practice at the top of their license. Can you explain a little bit what that means?
Yeah, so we really look for doctors who are already practicing baseline infertility, timed intercourse, maybe even prescribing Clomid, et cetera. And then the goal is we send them through didactic learning modules, which are proprietary. We built them from scratch under the supervision of reproductive endocrinologists and best practices, ASRM guidelines, et cetera. So that's a self-paced learning module system that the doctors that come on board with MATE go through. And then we send them to a partner facility that we have with an REI that's running it. We own simulators, and we have the doctors practice on those simulators because there's repetition that we like to see being built. Those memory muscles. Any surgeon's going to tell you it's the memory muscles. And then we actually send a reproductive endocrinologist to be present with them for the first batches of procedures. And then, we have QA, quality assurance, quality control built in to all of our tools, and we have decision support as well. So we've really tried to take it and make it as scalable as possible through standardization, which, that's not new to the universe. We look at manufacturing, we look at other industries, we look at, franchises like McDonald's. They don't get more hamburgers to people by making Big Macs differently in every location. So that's kind of how we think about what we're doing. And we also try to make sure that we're screening patients very early. And I can get into one of the logistical changes that will be enacting this year. That's pretty exciting. But we really try to get information as early in the process that could disqualify them from being treated at a mate clinic. And we feel really like that's an important part of our model, is we're sending the right people to the right places at the right time.
What is something that would disqualify someone from going to mate?
So if someone's been diagnosed with cancer, if someone our labs are micro labs, they're not giant facilities. They're not doing high volume. If a patient is HIV, currently our labs aren't built to accommodate that. So there are a handful of things that would exclude them right out of the gates. And then there are other things that could be discovered later on. That we want to make sure, if it is high complexity, it's going to a facility that is, capable of treating them. And we feel, that it's really important to be doing that and working with the industry. We're not trying to, I always say that the pie is big. We're not trying to steal a piece of anybody else's pie. We just want to bake a bigger pie. We're so far off the mark of actually treating everyone in this country that needs treatment, that we don't feel like we need to be competitive necessarily. We need to be collaborative.
And you had mentioned that you are working with REI specialists as well. So do the OBGYNs that get trained through MATE, do they have an REI specialist that's sort of their mentor or someone they can ask questions to? What's that collaboration like between those doctors?
Yep, we have a team of REs that take questions. Also, we have a red, yellow, green system. So if something gets kicked out of the funnel at any point, whether they're pre-treatment, in treatment, etc., if it's yellow, it needs a second review. If it's red, it means something's wrong, and we need to actually have a full case review here. And obviously, as the doctors get more enmeshed and have done more cases, that gets a little bit easier for them to identify, but we always have that fail safe in place for them.
And how many MATE facilities are there around the country now?
Yeah, currently our flagship is in Oklahoma City. We have a partner facility that we've worked with just on lead generation and patient screening in California. And they also have a satellite. We're doing our second full scope lab this year in Waco, Texas. That'll be the next full facility to open. We also have a facility opening in Woodbury, Minnesota. And then ideally, if we can get it to the finish line this year, Pittsburgh will come online this year as well. It may cross over into 25. We're also going to be opening a satellite. We have a nice hub and spoke model for the doctors that if they choose to build a little bit bigger lab, they can accommodate a wider geographic area through satellite locations. And so our first OKC satellite will open in Amarillo in the first quarter of this year, actually.
And so are the REI specialists specifically associated with certain centers, or do they just are they available nationally to whoever needs help?
Yeah, it's more of a DAO structure. So we're looking at how do we make sure that everything that our doctors are doing, we're trying to be very pragmatic in how we build our systems, our education, our patient screening, so that there is as little exception-based processing as possible. That's not to say that it doesn't happen, but it's more of a, availability, and everybody's on board to be helpful when it's needed.
And you had mentioned that we can figure out price. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How are you going to figure out price in this fairly expensive model?
Yeah. I think that anything is solvable that's, not just unsolvable. Geographically, people living in areas they can't get to a clinic, that's unsolvable with any other intervention other than to open a facility. So what I mean when I say we can solve price, obviously I think that we're going to start to see some shifts in the payer market. We know in Massachusetts, as an example, which is a fully mandated state, that the rate of care is higher in that state than it is in any other state. It's more reflective of like how it is in Denmark or Israel or Japan. I don't see personally, this is just my own signal reading, if you will. I don't see personally that the payer market is going to shift towards coverage of, the tail end of delayed onset of parenthood. But what I do see, particularly with the alarming rates of infertility increasing, the payer market may shift. We see that shift already in the employer market. It to earlier intervention, if you will, which would mean cryopreservation of tissue, either the oocytes or the semen. We're seeing, pretty alarming declines in semen quality, and so, I think we could see some shifts in that direction, probably more rapidly than we're going to see shifts at the tail end. The other thing is, we can bring down prices by efficiency. It's one of the things that we pride ourselves on, looking for the ways. Standardization is always cheaper. So how much of this can we standardize? Also doing low dosing methodologies, that's less expensive for the patients as well. One of the things, there's a lot of wasted medications out there. If you're not being, pretty specific about, the way that that's being done. And then also, as we grow and expand, we'll obviously have more of the ability on the procurement side to bring down costs for our provider network. And then in general, employers are increasingly covering this as a benefit. Downstream, we have to ask ourselves if this model really does expand the way we hope, do we eventually go to market with our own products around that? It could make sense, particularly given that we focus on different markets than, primary cities. That's not to say we'll never go into a primary city, but currently our goal is really on that, expanding the geographic access. So there's a number of facets that we can start to chip away at, to work on price, and improve prices.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching so far. If you found this interesting and helpful, please hit the like and subscribe button below. It not only helps the channel, but helps all the people that we interview. Thanks for watching. You had mentioned the earlier preservation and earlier intervention. So right now, as MATE stands, are you seeing more egg freezing being done by young women, or sperm freezing done? Or are you really seeing more people that are trying to conceive? Like, what's the kind of breakdown right now with the business?
Yeah, I mean, us personally, it's been interesting, and it will have some variety market to market. But in Oklahoma City, predominantly, it's people actively trying to get pregnant, and they're not the same age demographic as what we see in primary cities. It's actually, our average patient age is roughly 32. So it's quite a bit younger, which is alarming for its own set of reasons. It'll be interesting for us to see if that data holds true from market to market. I think if we're on the perimeter of a larger city such as, DC or New York or somewhere like that, we may see different demographics. We just don't know yet. But I will say what I am noticing, and I'm probably particularly attuned to it. I was at watching Mean Girls a couple weeks ago in the theater, and one of the previews, they were talking about egg freezing. And so I do think that it's entering the mainstream conversation. It's not necessarily this like taboo, shame-based thing anymore. I do still think for heterosexual couples, it is, unfortunately. I think, single women and LGBTQ couples, we have a different understanding from the outset that we're going to need some form of intervention. So I do still think there's a lot of shame, but I also am seeing a shift, like pop culture wise, around that. I was sitting at a Blue Bottle in San Francisco, and the table next to me, there were two women sitting there. One of them had just done egg freezing the week before, and the other one, the conversation was, "Oh, when is yours scheduled?" So it's certainly becoming more mainstream and more commonplace. And, back to that payer conversation, I think that the margins aren't really there to shift into that late onset of parenthood market, but preservation market, it's really something that, is a lot easier. Those patients, the younger and healthier they are, the easier it is, the less traumatic it is on the body, and the less expensive it is, quite frankly.
So does MATE take insurance then? Because you had mentioned the mandated states in which health insurance coverage for infertility is mandated. So what's the deal with MATE and insurance, and how does that all work?
Yeah, obviously we would love to be able to do everything all at once. We've started as a cash pay model. We do take employer benefits. We're in network with a number of employer benefits providers, and we are looking in the not too distant future to be able to add insurance coverage. Just some logistical tweaks, but we feel like it's really important to be able to add that. There was a gentleman who really reamed us out a while ago about not having insurance coverage, and it's tricky. It's not a single point of contention, because most states don't cover it fully. So there's some pros and some cons. But we are looking to add that. That was a long-winded answer, but it's a pretty complex issue, particularly as pertains to fertility, because most insurance coverages don't cover it. They may cover the diagnostics, they may cover, other pieces of it, or under certain circumstances, but it's not holistic. So it's pretty tricky. But we are trying to, again, make sure that we're covering what can be covered, and then obviously looking at full integration of insurance into the model.
Yeah, I totally agree because it is a very complicated issue. When I first my eggs in 2017, it wasn't covered.
Yep.
So it took me, just a year. I was still paying off crazy loans from med school. It took me about a year just to save up and actually have the capital. And then oddly enough, some portion of it got covered. So I didn't end up spending as much as I had to, or I thought I was going to spend, but it was very shocking. I was like, okay, this is weird. I don't know, but I'm not gonna question it.
Yeah.
Like,
Don't
okay.
ask any questions.
I don't know if you guys made a mistake, but cool.
Roll.
Um, and I remember the shame. I mean, I remember I don't know if I felt shame. I just felt like I didn't want to really talk about it because it kind of made these fears real that, maybe I'm never gonna have a family that I want, or maybe I'm gonna have a family much later than I really intend to, and or maybe I just want to have a family at all. And so I remember after I did the egg freeze in 2017, there was a whole 2 days where I was like, should I post it on social media? And I had a fairly active Instagram account, and I decided I was like, screw it, I'm gonna post it, and I posted about it, and I just got a flood of messages like, I have been thinking about this. I had no one to ask. Thank you for posting. And I was like, oh, this is on people's minds. We're just not
Yeah.
really talking about it. Um,
Yeah. It's
so
tough. And back to that, I recently went through a bunch of intakes, right? And I obviously know a bunch about the industry. I work in this industry. I'm running a company that's hopefully pioneering a new way to, hopefully it's a category defining business at the end of the day. But I went through several intakes, and I don't have coverage. We have pretty good health insurance policy, and I don't have coverage for it. It wasn't clean cut. It wasn't easy to get an answer from anyone. And then I went through these different intakes, and we were already moving in a certain direction with some changes to the orientation of pieces within our model. But then after going through these intakes myself, I was like, this just doesn't make any sense, and a quick example of that is I went through an intake. It didn't have a same-sex orientation option. So I'm filling out the form. I'm forcing my way into the forms, which feels off, right? That just doesn't feel great. I'm filling out, it takes several hours to go through the forms and the medical history. And then, I finally arrive at this conversation with a doctor that I'm paying for. And what stood out to me is that it was pure speculation and conjecture, because they have no diagnostic information from which to draw. And listen, at the end of the day, there are about 4 options for treatment. It's not like there are hundreds of different options. You're going to do timed intercourse at home. You're going to do an IUI in the office. Or you're going to do an oocyte preservation, or you're going to do IVF. And so why aren't we reorienting to make things more efficient for both the patient
Mhm.
and the doctor, so that by the time patients show up at the practice, 30% of our patients call in and they just want to know, is my body capable?
Mhm.
Right? Like, they want a baseline, and it shouldn't be that hard, and it shouldn't take hours of work and then an appointment and then a follow-up appointment to get that information. So we're really trying to focus on, because a big part of our model, given that we don't own these clinics, right? We're really an enablement tool for new doctors to come into this orbit and have full spectrum care for their patients. A big part of that is we want to be efficient with their time. Doctors are spending 60 to 80% of their time doing admin work. How do we better utilize their time? It's by reorienting some of this stuff, and it may look different. But I thought to myself, when we were reorienting this funnel for ourselves, I was like, why doesn't my primary care physician, if they're going to order the same panel every year, why don't they order it for me before I go into the office, so that when I get there, we're having a conversation about the panel, right? And we take that same thinking, and we're really hyper focused on trying to make this process a lot more efficient and clear for people.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's just so many issues with, you know, doing things ahead of time. And I'm a practicing physician, so I totally get both sides of it because
Yeah.
patients do come into me and they're like, "Oh, you didn't get that result?" I'm like, "No, I didn't." So now I have to schedule you again in 2 weeks when I
Yeah.
have the result, because I can't really call you with the result because I can't bill for that. And
Yep.
yeah, I don't even know where to put that on my schedule, like just a
Yep.
random phone call. It just doesn't work from a liability perspective. Like, I need to have everything on the books, everything that I discuss, like everything has to just be very properly done.
Yeah.
So it
It's
is,
tricky.
yeah, there's really the system as a whole is largely inefficient. And unfortunately doctors are just kind of have to play by the rules, so to speak, that kind of exist within like the framework of how we're working. So you had mentioned that you kind of help a lot of these clinicians be able to provide 360 care. So you're helping them. How does Mate make money in this model?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We function. We're not a franchise. I always like to say very clearly, we're not our franchise, but really we're pulling a playbook. We're pulling a page from that playbook and saying, okay, we want to make this as easy as possible. We do patient acquisition marketing, and we're installing the tech stack, we're doing the training, we provide the architectural plans. So we do a new market fee, and that can vary from partner to partner, and that's a one-time non-recurring fee that we charge, basically to for us to come in and install, execute against that. And then we take a percentage of revenue, top line revenue, for all the services. We're largely handling, as I said, we don't practice medicine, but we are handling all the billing, all the admin, all the patient screening, all the coordination of the patients and the schedules, and the oversight and compliance of both the medical side and the laboratory side. So we take 25% is our typical fee, 30%. It can be there, it can be a little bit lower, it depends on the particular needs of the practice. But it's a kind of like a percentage model.
In that initial fee, is the training covered in
Yep.
within?
The training is covered, the architectural plans are covered, the project management of the build out of the facility. And those we've done as we've done pretty small facilities, and we can model up to a larger facility. We do have a cutoff though. We don't want these to be gigantic facilities. It's really about having geographically dispersed, but we could do it for about 700 at the low end and a little bit higher on the high end. We've seen a little bit more than double that for a larger facility, but typically we always like to say average, it comes up to $1 million, um, which is a steep investment. But I can say, our flagship paid back their initial investment in just shy of 12 months, and they run at a 42% EBITDA margin, which is pretty healthy.
Yeah. Do you guys have any plans to get into the pharmaceutical side of things with all these clinics everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, we have a couple of great partners. It's not ideal in any way, shape, or form. I think, we all know it's similar to the insurance issue. We'd love to be able to solve all the problems at once, but we also are very wary of getting too spread out. Um, Downstream, absolutely. I would say it's not like at the top of our priority list right now, but it's something that we certainly would like to be able to ameliorate for patients and providers because it's tricky. And then I think last year, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was last year, there were a couple of shortages, which it's just wild when stuff like that happens because it is such a small market. We only did in 2021, I think it was around 300,000 cycles, so that's not a huge market, but if we are going to be meeting demand or even getting close to meeting demand, which would have been 3 million cycles, so that's how far off the mark we are. There's a lot that has to be improved, and hopefully, we're really focused on the supply side. We feel pretty bullish that that's been at the core of our model. We do see other facilities or companies starting to add de novo strategies with gynecologists and things like that, but we really still feel like there's just so much room for us to grow into in this market, and pharmacy is definitely something that needs improvement, and hopefully we can turn our focus on that downstream.
So you have had a very interesting career. What is your advice for someone who is, looking at healthcare to be an entrepreneur or just getting into this world? We both know that it's a very complicated um, world when it comes to entrepreneurship, very different from a lot of other industries. And I know you didn't start in healthcare, so what's kind of like your best advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think my advice is always not to be afraid to do new things or try new ideas. But also, a lot of what I'm drawing from is experience that's agnostically beneficial to businesses, right? Um, we've seen sort of standardization work across lots of industries, and I think that's the only true way to achieve scale. So I would say, focus on what are the pieces that agnostically can be, standardized for anything. But also, just not being afraid to voice new ideas. I find one of the things that was most jarring to me as I started to move deeper into my leadership of this organization is the legacy models and power dynamics within the healthcare industry are unlike anything that I've ever seen. And I come from highly regulated industries, and it's interesting and it's fun and it's exciting to be able to work with people. I always say, like, my goal is always to collaborate, and if we can sort of lower the drawbridge down and invite people over to have new conversations, we're all going to benefit from that. The private sector is really like, we have the freedom to think in new and different ways. What we should embrace that and really push it. And obviously we want to be very bottom line focused and think about efficiencies. And we've got to find the common language, and we got to find the ways to work within any industry that make a lot more sense. But be fearless, be brave, and I have to ask for help all the time. I think that's the other thing, particularly in leadership positions. If you feel like you don't have your own board of directors, go get one, because I have people that I'm constantly bouncing ideas off of, that help me personally and professionally navigate, because it's tricky, it's tough.
No, that's really helpful advice. Not just, I learned something from every person I interview, and this was super helpful. And I love the comment about standardization because I probably need to do a little bit more of that in my own practice. But thank you so much for your time. This was really interesting. I hope that everyone watching got a lot of value out of it. And Traci, if you're okay with it, I'd love to do a follow up in a year and kind of see where it
Yeah,
may.
absolutely, that'd be awesome.
All right. Thanks for being here.